Mankind has always been a user of energy. But nowadays we are using so much that there's a real danger of running out of the stuff. So let's have a look at energy. In the beginning, man had only the strength of his own muscles and the rays of the sun to warm his or her body.
Ooh!
There was obviously a need for other forms of energy. One of his earliest discoveries was fire, which was invented by a Boy Scout rubbing two sticks together. But I think we'd better come back to that one later. In the meantime, what about those poor old muscles, which were clearly feeling the strain? Well, it was about now that man learned how to harness another very useful form of energy. The horse. That proud and majestic creature that had hitherto run free across the wide-open plains, like Newmarket, Aintree, and so on. With the horse, man found that all of a sudden he could travel much faster, for greater distances than had ever been possible before, and he could carry heavier loads. He also found that with the help of the horse he could plough his fields, which led to the invention of agriculture and common market mountains. Horses were not only useful for work, of course, they could be used for pleasure.
Oh, I'm dreadfully sorry. We seem to have run out of oats. Oh, yes.
But despite being beautiful and good for the rhubarb, horses were unreliable. So man looked for other sources of energy and turned to the wind. And after a little development, we had windmills everywhere, their huge sails cutting a swathe through the breeze as they spun unceasingly. Apart from being very picturesque and romantic, windmills could be used in all sorts of ways, such as milling flour, pumping water out of Holland, and doing lots of other useful things. But although the wind was a bit erratic for some jobs, it wasn't long before man discovered that it was very useful for driving ships. And before long, mariners were crisscrossing the uncharted oceans of the globe, from the tropics to the poles, visiting strange new lands to trade in exotic treasures, meet far-off people, and establish empires. With the boundless energy of the winds to fill their sails, there was no place where the great ships could not go. But it was still perhaps a bit erratic and could sometimes let you down.
Oh, I'm dreadfully sorry. We seem to have run out of wind.
And so man turned to his rivers and streams as a source of power, and invented the water wheel. But even water could prove unreliable in times of drought, which meant a lot of jolly hard work for some poor people. And eventually, this led to a revolution. An industrial revolution. Now, all of this is thought to have really started when a fella called James Watt invented the kettle, which before long led to the steam engine. By now, things were getting awfully technical, but man had at last found a new and reliable source of energy for doing dozens of useful things, such as working machinery. One of the first areas to really feel the impact of steam engines was the north of England, where a man called King Cotton discovered that where there's muck, there's brass. With the help of a Lancashire lass called Spinning Jenny and her mule, it wasn't long before he had used the steam engine to invent the textile industry, which of course led to Marks and Spencer's. Another very important job for steam engines was pumping water out of mines. This was all very useful because while the mines needed the engines of course needed the coal. Now, coal, which is made from old trees and bits of dead dinosaur that have been left lying around for ages and ages until they've gone all black and horrid, is of course found deep underground. It was a very useful source of energy, but as getting it out was a messy business, the job was quite rightly left to women and children. This was a good thing, because it left the men free to get on with more important tasks, such as inventing better, faster steam engines, with more twiddly bits and great chunks of brass to polish. Then someone had the bright idea of putting a steam engine on wheels, and so invented British Rail. The world's first train ran from Stockton to Darlington, but was unfortunately 2 hours late, owing to snow on the points at Crewe. Pardon? Among the many useful things invented along with trains were British Rail sandwiches and day trips to Blackpool. And all this steam power meant that there was plenty of energy to drive Michael Faraday's dynamos and make electricity. And at just about this time, yet another new source of energy was discovered. For some quite unaccountable reason, this fella started drilling holes in the ground and struck oil. This, of course, led to the internal combustion engine, and then to the motor car, Texas oil millionaire, Dallas, Arab oil sheiks, petrol tax, road tax, parking fines, juggernauts, and traffic jams. But all in all, the car proved to be a pretty useful and reliable machine.
Oh, I'm terribly sorry. We seem to have run out of,
Oh, come off it.
Well, this time we really are running out, all of us. But fortunately, a few years ago, a chap called Albert Einstein worked out that E equals mc squared, which was something dreadfully clever, all to do with matter and energy and the speed of light going round to see something square. And it seemed that all we needed to do was split this atom. Now, this was not the easiest thing in the world to do, as it turned out, atoms being devilishly tricky little things to get hold of, let alone split. It clearly was going to call for more than just a prod with a pointed stick. But many of the world's best scientists were working very hard on the problem, and eventually it all paid off. We had nuclear energy and a lot of radioactive waste. Now, it's about time that we dealt with a silly idea called perpetual motion, which is where things just go on and on forever. But unfortunately, there is a law against this, and it is quite impossible. So let's see what alternatives there are. Firstly, there's hydroelectric power. Remember that water wheel earlier on? But this means building huge dams and power stations, and flooding large areas of countryside, which can lead to demonstrations and protests outside Parliament. Another way of using water is wave energy. Britain has lots of waves crashing all around us, which could be used to make electricity, although we would need some way of smoothing out the lumpiness, so to speak. And wave power should also be fairly reliable.
We seem to have run out of waves.
So, perhaps we should be looking again at wind power. Modern windmills come in all shapes and sizes, and although not as pretty and romantic as the old-fashioned mills, they are very efficient, clean and reliable. Provided, of course, that the wind blows. Or, what about using the wind once more for transport? And, of course, we shouldn't forget our old friend the sun, which is always up there shining faithfully, and which can be used for solar heating of houses and things. Or we can make electricity using photoelectric cells. These have even been used for sun-powered cars. But once again, we have the problem of reliability.
Oh, I'm so dreadfully sorry. We seem to have run out of sun.
And of course, we could all do a lot more to save energy. For instance, by double glazing, loft insulation, and cavity wall foam. Or by wearing warmer clothes so that the central heating can be turned down. So, as long as he's careful and continues to make full use of his ingenuity, the future needn't be bleak, and man should still have all the energy he needs. Now, woman, that poor, frail creature, well, as far as she...